Well, another season of Star Trek is in the books. God, do you ever take a step back and think about how ridiculously goddamn spoiled we Trekkies have been lately? I mean, 2020 was a shit year in general, but we got 3 seasons of new Star Trek. The first season of Picard, the first season of Lower Decks, and the 3rd season of Discovery. And it was all good. Well, it averaged out to good. Some of it wasn't that good, but none of it was terrible, and some of it was pretty great. The Have Phaser Will Travel version of 7 of 9 was badass. I got my Will Riker fix in both live action and animated forms, and finally, we beheld the gentle, diffident glory of Captain Saru. Which brings me to the actual topic of this video, because this ain't no Star Trek year in review. This is a Star Trek Discovery Season 3 review. So let's get to talking about these episodes, and be warned, spoilers ahead. That Hope Is You, Part 1. Ever wonder what happened to everyone after they went through that time portal at the end of Season 2? Before the epilogue that played like a backdoor pilot for another show, closing the season on a pleasing but strange note that left me more interested in watching a then non-existent Captain Pike series than the next season of Discovery? Well, first of all, congratulations on making it to the end of that sentence, and second, good news! Michael makes it to the future! Yay! In this first episode of Disco's 3rd season, we see Michael crash land in the distant future, it's the late 32nd century, and discover that their mission was a success. All sentient life in the galaxy was not destroyed. But there is some bad news. Discovery is nowhere to be found, and also Michael isn't where she expected to be. Oh well, at least she runs into Book, the crusading interplanetary animal psychic and cat daddy who is destined to be her new boyfriend. And I do mean runs into. Their meet-cute involves Michael crashing into Book's ship as she emerges from the time vortex, sending them both plummeting to the surface of a nearby planet. This is a fun episode, and made for a good introduction to the series' new status quo. The 32nd century is a lot different than the era in which the show was previously set. Dilithium is scarce, thanks to a mysterious catastrophe called the Burn, which means long-distance space travel is a lot more difficult than it used to be. As a result, the Federation is far weaker and smaller than it was in the 23rd century. We're also introduced to some of the new technology of this era, like personal transporters and Book's shape-shifting spaceship. And we get our first glimpse of the Orion-led Emerald Chain, who turn out to be the major recurring baddies this time around. The episode focuses on Michael, with the rest of the Discovery crew not appearing, and Sonequa Martin Green gets to play sides of Michael we aren't used to seeing. I love her moment of unrestrained elation when she reads life signs for the first time and realizes their mission to stop control was successful. She also gets to essentially play drunk in a bit later in the episode when she's under the influence of a truth drug, and she looks like she's just having the time of her life. Far from home. And now we learn what happened to the rest of the cast when they went through the time vortex. Discovery emerges in the 32nd century, crash lands on a nearby planet. Lots of crashing into nearby planets in this season so far. Why is there always a nearby planet? And Saru and Tilly set out to a nearby settlement in the hopes of finding supplies they need to repair the ship. The clock is ticking because the ship is slowly being encased in parasitic ice that will eventually crush it. Saru and Tilly arrive at the settlement, which is basically a saloon populated by miners who are being bullied by space gangsters, as Discovery reminds those pricks at the Mandalorian that Star Trek invented this space western shit. I don't actually think they're pricks. The Mandalorian is a good show. Calm down. Anyway, Georgiou arrives at the saloon too and helps Saru and Tilly and the miners deal with the gangsters. Meanwhile, Stamets and Reno treat us to some fun comic banter as they work together to repair the ship. But another ship arrives at the last minute to save the day, and it's Michael! It turns out she arrived in the future a year ago, and she's been searching for the Discovery ever since. Another solid episode. Saru and Tilly are a good pairing, and Stamets and Reno are also a great team, which really helped bring out a more likable side of Stamets without having to fundamentally alter his character. And the 1-year time jump between this episode and the previous one enabled them to give Michael better hair. People of Earth, Now that Burnham and the rest of the crew are back together, Discovery spore jumps to Earth to, check on things. See how the old place is looking. I'm sure it's fine. It's Star Trek. You know that Earth has gotta be. Is that a force field around the entire planet? Is Earth a gated community now? So it turns out Earth is no longer a part of the Federation. After the burn, which kind of messed up the whole interstellar travel thing for most people, Earth became a tempting target for people like those space gangsters we met in the previous episode, who are constantly on the lookout for exploitable resources, especially dilithium. At least the Golden Gate Bridge is still there. That's something, right? The crew encounters the Earth Defense Force, including Adira, who is kind of a child prodigy engineering genius, and it also turns out Adira has been joined with a Trill symbiont whose previous host was a Starfleet admiral who sent a transmission that the Discovery crew were hoping to use to find the rest of Starfleet. They also meet a gang of raiders from Saturn's moon Titan who have been fighting with Earth, and Saru and Burnham negotiate a peaceful resolution to their conflict, thus proving that the old-fashioned Federation ways still work, I guess. Oh, also, Burnham and Saru have a chat about who ought to be in charge of the ship, and they agree it should be Saru, which means Captain Saru! And it's about damn time. I almost cried. Forget me not. So Adira joins the crew, and they travel to the Trill homeworld because Adira can't access the memories of the symbiont, which might have something to do with the fact that Adira is human and was joined when the previous host, Gray, who was also Adira's boyfriend, died following an accident. Retrieving the symbiont's memories is important because the host before Gray was that Starfleet admiral who can tell the Discovery crew where to find the rest of the fleet. Things on the Trill homeworld aren't so great. They've grown pretty xenophobic, and they are not at all happy to learn that a symbiont has been joined with a human. But one of them does lead Adira and Burnham to the magic Trill cave, so Adira can go for a swim in the milk grotto and hopefully commune with the symbiont. Meanwhile, Saru is concerned about the morale of his crew, and the sphere data, which is kind of a separate consciousness living in the computer, suggests showing everybody a Buster Keaton movie. So Saru arranges a screening of Sherlock Jr. because the producers of Discovery agree with me that Sherlock Jr. is the best movie ever. Or more likely because it just became public domain a couple of years ago. Adira eventually recovers all the memories of the previous hosts of Tal, the symbiont, including those of Gray, who, it's revealed at the end of the episode, is also appearing to Adira. That's weird. Another solid episode, some interesting world building regarding the Trill homeworld here. World building isn't ordinarily enough to hold my interest on its own, but there's more going on here than just that. Adira's story is developed in intriguing ways, as is Lieutenant Detmer's. She's having a lot of trouble dealing with the trauma she experienced after piloting Discovery during its crash into the ice planet back in episode 2. And, come on, the crew watches Sherlock Jr., which is literally my favorite movie ever. Characters in a Star Trek show watch my favorite movie. Never expected that to happen, but it did. Alex Kurtzman, I never held a grudge against you for your Star Trek stuff. I've always mostly dug it, but you know what? I forgive you for writing those Transformers movies. We're totally cool now, man. I'm sure that's a weight off your shoulders. Die trying. Thanks to those recovered Trill memories from Adira, Discovery arrives at Starfleet headquarters, which is also Federation headquarters, because Star Trek writers and fans have been conflating the two for decades anyway, so to hell with it. Starfleet/Federation headquarters is pretty cool. It's not located on a planet, it's more of a space station and a shipyard contained inside a distortion field that cloaks it, making it virtually invisible from the outside. There's a nice sequence as Discovery enters the field and approaches the station, where we see the crew running to lookout windows, awestruck as they take in the 32nd century ships in the fleet, including the Voyager J, because you gotta continue that legacy, and the USS Nog, which is a lovely tribute to the dearly departed Aaron Eisenberg. But the heartwarming sort of homecoming doesn't last, because when Saru and Burnham beam over to visit Starfleet Commander-in-Chief Admiral Vance, they learn that Starfleet doesn't exactly trust them. Turns out not everybody's ready to believe the story of a 1,000-year-old starship showing up out of nowhere following a galaxy-wide natural disaster that seriously compromised warp speed travel, not to mention a lengthy war involving time travel. There's a shout out for all you Star Trek Enterprise fans. Even worse than the lack of trust, Vance tells Saru that if Discovery's story does check out and it's accepted into the fleet, the crew would most likely be reassigned to other ships as needed. The prospect of their surrogate family being broken up is deeply upsetting to many on the crew. Luckily, the crew is able to prove themselves to Vance. Burnham commands Discovery on a mission to find and rescue a ship containing a Federation seed vault that holds the key to creating an antidote for an infection that is the cause of a refugee crisis. Is that convoluted enough? But you can follow it, right? Then it's a good Star Trek plot. Anyway, they get the seeds they need, and Admiral Vance agrees to allow the crew of Discovery to stay together, stressing that they will still be under his command and will go and do what he orders them to do. Burnham really wants to figure out what caused the burn, but Vance tells her to cool her heels as far as that's concerned, because they have more urgent matters to worry about. Points off from this one for the lack of a scene where the crew watches Chaplin City Lights, my second favorite movie, but points added back on for casting David Cronenberg as the guy who interrogates Georgiou, because that's another nice surprise. I never figured on seeing the director of such classic films as The Fly, The Dead Zone, A History of Violence, or Crash. Not the Altman pastiche with the racist cop who sexually assaults a woman and then gets to redeem himself by rescuing her from a burning car that won Best Picture, the kinky one, in a Star Trek show, but hey, I ain't complaining. Scavengers. Burnham and Georgiou go behind Captain Saru's back to embark on an unsanctioned mission to rescue Burnham's space cat daddy boyfriend Book. They rescue Book and his Andorian buddy Rin from the clutches of Osira, the leader of the Emerald Chain. Book has found the black box from a starship destroyed during the burn, which Burnham hopes to use to discover the cause of the disaster. That's all well and good, but Saru can't just let Burnham's insubordination slide, so he removes her from her post as his first officer. Burnham is upset, but she understands. She even tells Saru that he's doing the right thing. Oh, and Stamets sees Adira talking to Gray, who Stamets can't see, in the mess hall, and he's like, "What's up with talking to yourself?" And Adira explains about Gray. And Stamets is like, "Well, my husband was murdered, and then like a year later we found him alive inside a magic mushroom network. So, I'm cool with it." Unification 3. So Tilly analyzes the data from the black box Burnham got from Book in the last episode and figures out that the burn didn't happen instantaneously. It spread from a single point across the galaxy. And also, there's this secret research project called SB-19 that was operating at the time the burn occurred that could provide even more information, but the Federation can't access it because it was a Vulcan project and they aren't sharing. Oh, and by the way, the Vulcans aren't Federation members anymore, and their home planet is called Nivar now, because Romulans live there too after their planet was destroyed way back in the 24th century. Burnham thinks that's neat because, according to the historical records, her brother, Spock, was instrumental in the early days of the Vulcan-Romulan reunification movement. We even get a clip of Spock from the unification episode of TNG to bring newer fans who haven't seen that episode up to speed, and also to further piss off the angry, impotent nerds who still insist that Discovery isn't part of the same timeline as the older shows. Hoping Burnham can use her connection to Spock to convince the Vulcans to fork over that SB-19 data, Vance orders Discovery to Nivar. But when they get there, the head Vulcan is like, "Yeah, nah." So Burnham, who knows a thing or two about this Vulcan stuff, having been raised by Vulcans and being a graduate of the Vulcan Science Academy, invokes Takal Inket, an ancient Vulcan rite designed to reveal truth, which, once invoked, cannot be denied. Damn, really? I hope they don't have Republicans on Vulcan. Anyway, as part of the Takal Inket, Burnham gets an advocate, and it just so happens her advocate is her mom, Gabrielle, who also came to the future via the Red Angel suit last season, and who eventually became a member of the Romulan Order of the Qowat Milat. Small universe. The T'Kal and Ket eventually comes to revolve around Burnham's ambivalence about her role in Discovery's crew, since spending a year doing her own thing with Book, and then getting demoted from first officer by Saru last week. And after some bullying from her mom, she processes through some of her recent issues in front of a bunch of strangers, and this convinces the head Vulcan to share the SB-19 data. So, yeah, mission accomplished. Good job, Michael. Also, Saru appoints Tilly acting first officer. Tilly isn't sure about this because she's just an ensign, but literally every single person on the ship, including the many higher-ranking officers, is fine with it, so she says yes. I know some fans objected to an ensign being elevated to the post of first officer, even in a temporary capacity, saying it was unrealistic that it happened at all, and even more unrealistic that it happened without objection from anyone, but I didn't care because A, it's Tilly and she's one of the best characters, B, there's enough going on this season, we don't need conflict between Tilly and the crew on top of everything else, and C, it's interesting and has good story potential, and I don't care if it's a realistic portrayal of how promotions work in the military, because Starfleet isn't an actual military organization. It isn't an actual organization at all. It's all made up. The Sanctuary. The Emerald Chain is threatening Book's home planet, so Discovery jumps there and Burnham and Book beam down to find Book's brother and see what they can do to help. And eventually Book and his brother use their psychic Dr. Dolittle powers to save the day. Meanwhile, Osira's ship shows up, and she has a back and forth with Saru, and a standoff ensues when Osira demands that Saru turn over Rin, the Andorian guy they rescued a couple of episodes ago. Saru knows he can't order Discovery to fire on Osira because that would provoke open hostilities between the Federation and the Emerald Chain, which Admiral Vance doesn't want. So he gets Detmer, who is still dealing with her crash-related trauma, and Rin to jump in Book's ship and attack Osira's ship from there. That way, Saru can claim plausible deniability. Hey, I didn't order him to do it. They stole the ship from our shuttle bay and launched that attack themselves. But don't worry, we'll punish him for it real good. We're so mad. The success of the attack allows Detmer to get her confidence back. Meanwhile, Adira and Stamets are running an algorithm to analyze a distress signal they discovered that they think might provide some new info on what caused the burn, and Adira, who up until this point has been referred to as a girl, asks Stamets to use gender-neutral pronouns to refer to them from now on. And Stamets is like, it's the future, and we're well past our bullshit hang-ups about gender identity, so no big deal. Later, Adira reveals to Stamets that they aren't seeing gray anymore, but they don't know why, and Stamets hangs out with them and accompanies Adira, playing piano as they play the cello. It's a nice little scene. Terra Firma Part 1 and Terra Firma Part 2. So, a subplot these last few episodes has been that Georgiou has some mysterious illness, but they can't figure out what it is. Finally, in the first half of this two-parter, David Cronenberg explains that Georgiou has suffered damage at the molecular level caused by the combination of time travel and crossing universes, because she's from the Mirror Universe, which, incidentally, has been drifting further and further away from the Prime Universe in the centuries since Discovery made its time jump. But Discovery's computer, with help from the sphere data, suggests that a cure for Georgiou's condition can be found on the planet Danis 5. So, the ship jumps to Danis 5, and Burnham and Georgiou beam down, and they find a middle-aged white American guy dressed like it's the 1930s sitting in the snow next to a door. And I'm like, oh, this is some classic Star Trek shit. Little did I know. The guy's name is Carl, and he says that Georgiou needs to walk through the door, and they argue back and forth for a while. Then Georgiou walks through the door, and she finds herself back in the Mirror Universe during her reign as Emperor. Specifically, it's right before Emperor Georgiou discovered that her universe's version of Michael Burnham betrayed her, and Georgiou ordered Burnham executed. Given a second chance, Georgiou tries to save Mirror Michael to convince her that there's a better way to do things than constant murder and betrayal, though she's still Mirror Georgiou, so for her, that better way mostly involves less murder and betrayal, not a total babyface turn. But it doesn't work, and she and Michael end up fighting and killing each other. But instead of dying, Georgiou wakes up back on Danis 5, where Carl explains that Georgiou's trip back to her old stomping grounds was a test to see if she had truly been changed by her time with the crew of Discovery. The good news is, she has been. She's a good enough person to live. So, all she has to do is walk through the door, and she'll be transported back in time to an era in the Prime universe when it was still aligned with the Mirror universe, so her molecules won't go all kablooey. Oh, and by the way, Carl is the Guardian of Forever. This episode was released the same week as the season finale of The Mandalorian, which featured a gratuitous cameo by Luke Skywalker, because that was fan service week, I guess. Carl being the Guardian of Forever is fine. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was super fan servicey and unnecessary, but it was fine. The whole two-parter was fine. It was a clever way to write Georgiou off the show and set her up for her spin-off, which is still happening at some point, last I heard. The Mirror universe is fun as always, though it definitely does better in small doses. Seeing Sonequa Martin Green chew the scenery as the evil version of Burnham was a delight, but plot-wise, I don't really see why this had to be a two-parter. Maybe they were an episode short this season? I don't know. Su'Kal. Discovery travels to the Verubin Nebula, which has been determined to be the origin point of the burn. Saru, Burnham, and Culber beam down to a dilithium-rich planet in the middle of the nebula, where a Kelpian ship crashed 125 years ago. The ship is the source of that distress call they'd been analyzing. But when they materialize on the ship, they find themselves in the middle of a holographic simulation that has masked their equipment and altered their appearances to make them different species. Burnham appears as Trill, Culber as Bajoran, and Saru as human. Eventually, they find Su'Kal, the only remaining survivor of the crash and the only person immune to the high levels of radiation on the planet, which are slowly killing Saru, Burnham, and Culber. Osyraa shows up with her ship and manages to take over Discovery with a boarding party. Book leaves on his own ship and rescues Burnham from the planet inside the nebula, while Saru and Culber stay behind with Su'Kal. Also, Adira beams down to the nebula planet to bring them medicine to treat the radiation sickness so they don't, die before anyone can rescue them. Osyraa halos Stamets and forces him to operate the spore drive, and Book and Burnham emerge from the nebula just in time to see Discovery and Osyraa's ship jump away. As has become typical with the current era of Star Trek shows when they're approaching the end of the season, this episode consists of a lot of table setting. But it's mostly exciting table setting, and the bit where Burnham, Saru, and Culber materialize on the ship and find themselves inexplicably appearing to be different species is another concept that feels very much like old school Trek, which I appreciated. There is a tide. Burnham and Book catch up to Discovery and are able to fly his ship into the shuttle bay just before Osyraa takes the ship through the protective shield around Federation headquarters. Once inside, Osyraa beams aboard the space station and begins negotiations with Admiral Vance. Apparently, Osyraa's purpose is to convince the Federation to form an alliance with the Emerald Chain. Despite this being an obvious ploy from a power-hungry interplanetary despot, Vance hears her out and is even impressed by the agreement Osyraa proposes. But before he can sign anything, Vance places one final condition. Osyraa must turn herself over to stand trial for her many crimes. That's a deal breaker for Osyraa, who goes back to Discovery, vaporizes that poor Andorian guy Rin, and orders her ship to open fire on Federation headquarters. Meanwhile, elsewhere on Discovery, Burnham rescues Stamets from Osyraa's troops, but then launches him away from the ship in an escape pod to keep Osyraa from being able to use the spore drive. Stamets had wanted to use the spore drive to jump back to the nebula to rescue Culber and the others, so he's kind of pissed at Burnham now. Burnham gets captured by Osyraa's people. Elsewhere on the ship, the rest of the bridge crew, being led by Tilly, who is still acting first officer, gathers and prepares to try and take back the ship. And they're offered help from a group of repair droids, who, it turns out, are being controlled by the sphere data. Even more table setting! Plus, some die-hard style action as the crew tries to take back the ship from Osira. The conflict between Burnham and Stamets is well done, and a nice reversal that demonstrates the evolution of both characters, as now Stamets is the one who is being led by his heart, while Burnham is the one forced to make the harder, colder choice that gives everyone the best chance to survive. That Hope Is You Part 2. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about the previous episode, Su'Kal caused the burn. And in this episode, the season finale, we get a little more exposition to explain how that happened. Apparently, Su'Kal has a genetic condition that allows him to be influenced by his surrounding environment and vice versa. And when he was a child, he watched his mother die of radiation poisoning, an experience so traumatic that his trauma was carried through the dilithium on the planet where the ship had crashed, and then through subspace to the dilithium throughout the rest of the galaxy. And there's your burn. Thanks, Su'Kal. I know, he was only a kid. It wasn't his fault. I'm a dick. Anyway, while Saru, Culber, Adira, and Gray, who is back, and also thanks to the holographic matrix on the crashed ship visible to everyone, help Su'Kal deal with his trauma, the crew of Discovery fight to take their ship back from Osira. Burnham and Book escape from Osira's clutches and end up fighting some goons on and around a turbolift car as it hurtles through the ship's surprisingly cavernous turboshaft. By the way, apparently some people really had a problem with the turbolift stuff, complaining about how long the turbolift was in motion, how humongous the space it was moving through seemed to be, and so forth. So let me assure you that, all jokes aside, I did not give a shit. And the realism or lack thereof of the turbolift stuff did not diminish my enjoyment of the episode at all. I don't care that we've seen turboshafts on other Trek shows and they don't look like that. I don't care about your frame-by-frame analysis which establishes that the lift couldn't have traveled that far at that speed without running out of room inside the ship. I don't care. Meanwhile, Tilly and the rest of the bridge crew, with some help from the sphere-controlled repair droids, though not much, I have to say, given how big of a deal the end of the last episode set this up to be, put a plan in motion to force Discovery, which is flying back to Osira's Emerald Chain base, out of warp. Osira tries to stop Tilly and the crew by turning off life support, but Lieutenant Awoshikun, who it turns out can hold her breath for a long time, is able to make it to one of the nacelles and knock the ship out of warp. Meanwhile, Burnham makes it to the central computer core, fights with Osira, survives being Vera Webstered, kills Osira, and resets the computer, regaining control of the ship. They escape from Osira's ship, use the spore drive, which it turns out Book can operate because his Dr. Dolittle powers allow him to communicate with the spores, to jump back to the nebula and rescue Saru, Culber, Adira, and Su'Kal, and return to the Federation, after which Saru takes some leave to take Su'Kal home to Kaminar, and Burnham is, somewhat reluctantly, promoted to Captain of Discovery. Stamets is reunited with Culber and Adira, who has sort of become their surrogate child. Culber has promised to find a way to make Gray permanently visible to everybody. The rest of the crew gets sharp new 32nd century uniforms, and thanks to the vast deposits of dilithium found in the Verubin Nebula, the Federation, with Discovery and its spore drive taking the lead, can finally begin to stitch the galaxy back together. Burnham wraps things up with a closing voiceover about the importance of connecting with each other. We get an on-screen title quoting Gene Roddenberry saying pretty much the same thing, just in case we haven't gotten the point yet. And then they play us out with the classic Star Trek theme over the end credits. I guess after almost a year of COVID-related social distancing, the producers figured it was a message we needed to hear and wanted to make sure we didn't miss it. I have to say, despite being well executed as usual, the last couple of episodes kinda lost me with all the complicated plotting and exposition and setting things up for the finale, but by the end, this last episode totally had me. Just like last season, it was a bumpy ride, and I can't say I loved every second of it, but ultimately, it worked. So, let's talk about the season as a whole, and let's start with what didn't work so much. The two biggest problems I have with this season are the burn and Osira. The burn is a good idea. I like having the 32nd century being dramatically different from other eras of Star Trek history we've seen. I like seeing the Federation / Starfleet in a diminished, more vulnerable position. And I like the reason for that being a disaster that compromises the ability to travel through space. And I like the cause of the burn being unknown, which creates a mystery for the characters to solve. Mysteries can work well as engines of extended story arcs. It's all very sound, but as with the previous season of Discovery and the first season of Star Trek Picard, the payoff of the mystery is backloaded so far into the season that by the time we learn what it is, it's almost guaranteed to be a disappointment because it's been built up for so long. After teasing it out for most of a season and presenting an investigation that consisted mostly of the characters following breadcrumbs, it would be difficult to make any solution to the mystery of the burn work well. Having Su'Kal's trauma be the cause of the burn is fine. It's a nice idea, in fact, and it would tie the season together thematically in a really lovely way if it worked better. I see where they were going, I get what they were trying to do, and even if I didn't, they had Burnham and then Gene Roddenberry himself spell it out at the end. But ultimately, it just doesn't land. I appreciate the intention of telling a story where the thing that broke the world turns out to have been a trauma that cut people off from each other, where the thing that made the future dark and cold and fearful was our disconnection, but I don't think they quite pull it off. And Osira is the same kind of thing. I like having the big villain of the season be a space pirate, but I never really buy her as a threat to the entire Federation, even with the Federation and Starfleet in its greatly reduced 32nd century condition. Osira and the Emerald Chain feel like they would have been good villains for like an episode of TNG, or maybe an acceptable recurring nemesis for Voyager. If Osira had been an adversary specifically of Discovery, rather than supposedly a threat to the entire Federation, that might have worked better. Osira herself is a fine character. Janet Kidder does a good job playing her. Her attempt to negotiate an alliance with the Federation late in the series revealed that she has cunning and ambition and guts. She's complex, but still essentially evil. Just ask Rin about that. Oh, wait, you can't. One of those little repair droids is probably picking him up off the deck of the bridge with a sponge. Osira's not a bad villain at all. I just don't think the series does a good enough job establishing that the scope of her villainy is great enough to threaten the Federation. Despite the size of her ship and the apparent reach of her criminal network, she just seems small time. Also, she only actually appears on screen in 4 out of 13 episodes, which doesn't help either. Those are my biggest problems with the show this season. Beyond those, the pacing problems that have dogged every season of Discovery so far, as well as Star Trek Picard, are still present, though they aren't quite as bad this time. The show strikes a better balance between serialization and standalone episodes this season than it has previously, but it still feels like there's too much time between setups and payoffs. And while this problem is also less pronounced than it has been in previous seasons, the show still suffers from having too many interesting ideas and not enough space in which to explore them. Just this season, we had exciting new characters and developments like Captain Saru, First Officer Tilly, Adira and the ghost version of Grey, the budding parent-child relationship between Stamets and Culber and Adira, the romance between Burnham and Book, Book being a pet psychic, Detmer's post-traumatic stress, Georgiou's mysterious illness and kinda sorta redemption, the recurring presence of the sphere data, plus the mystery of the burn and the threat of Osira and the Emerald Chain. There's potential in all of those premises, and some of them get explored more than others, but I don't think any of them is allowed to truly reach their potential because they feel so crowded by everything else. As a result, we get moments like Georgiou telling Mirror Burnham about how much better things are in the Prime universe, or the rest of the crew bidding a heartfelt farewell to Georgiou, who is a former dictator responsible for the deaths and enslavement of billions of people, or Stamets describing Adira as his child, that are nice in theory and work up to a point, but don't feel fully earned. Also, we're now 3 full seasons into the show, and we still barely know most of the bridge crew. We got a little more time with Detmer this season, which I appreciated, and even less with Owoshikun, but still a little bit, and that was nice. I know on Discovery, unlike other Trek shows, the bridge crew mostly consists of recurring characters rather than regulars, and that's fine, but Deep Space Nine had a lot of recurring characters too, and it feels like by the end of the 3rd season, we knew a lot more about, say, Nog, or Garrick, or Rom, or Dukat than we do about Detmer or Owoshikun, or especially Reese and Bryce and Nilsson, who are mostly there just to get talked at by the other characters. And one more thing, I could have done with fewer scenes of characters telling Burnham how awesome she is. I'm not anti-Burnham at all, I want to emphasize. I've seen some folks criticizing the show for being too Burnham-centric. I don't think that's a problem. I mean, she's the lead protagonist. If the writers want the show to revolve mostly around her, that's a completely legitimate choice for them to make. But off the top of my head, we saw Saru, Tilly, Gabrielle, Georgiou, Culber, and Vance each do their own version of the same scene, where they tell Burnham that she's just the most amazing person ever. Show, don't tell is one of the most basic rules of creative writing, and I think it's a good rule. And the fact that we had so many scenes throughout the season featuring characters telling us how great Michael is suggests the writers lacked confidence in their ability to show us how great Michael is. That's what didn't work for me about the show this season, but there was plenty that did work. Once again, my overall opinion of the show is positive. It's not perfect, but warts and all, it mostly works. I loved Captain Saru, his gentle but firm command style, his complicated relationship with Michael, his less complicated but endearing relationship with Tilly, the pride he displays when he learns his home planet of Kaminar eventually joined the Federation, the patience and tenderness he shows to Su'Kal. He provided some of my favorite moments of the season. And Doug Jones showed himself yet again to be a subtle, skillful, soulful actor. Saru's character design is one of my favorites ever in a Star Trek show, but he's a lot more than just cool prosthetics, and that's thanks to the writers and to Doug Jones. I like Burnham's sense of disconnection this season and how it ties into the overall theme of the season. I like that Sonequa Martin-Green got to stretch her legs a bit more this time, play some notes as Michael that she hasn't really gotten to play before. She begins the season separated from the rest of the crew, and even though she finds them again by the end of the 2nd episode, it takes her until the end of the season to really find her place. And that place, as it turns out, is a place she's been trying to earn her way to since we saw her as Georgiou's first officer on the Shenzhou in the very first episode of the series, the captain's chair. The other major characters who grew and developed in interesting directions this year were Stamets and Culber, particularly Stamets, but Culber settled into a role as unofficial ship's counselor with Detmer and to a lesser extent Burnham, and it's a good fit for him. Stamets, through his relationship with Adira, takes on some much-needed depth this season. We see that his experiences aboard Discovery, particularly losing Culber and then getting him back, have affected him, have changed him. His loss of and reunion with Culber is what allows him to relate so easily to Adira when they tell him about the manifestation of gray that only they can see. And it makes perfect sense for his character to respond to them the way he does. Moving beyond characters, I appreciated that this season of Discovery was about trauma, how it can affect our lives and how we can deal with it. In addition to the burn itself, which turns out to have been caused by Su'Kal's trauma, we get 2 separate circumstances where characters have to face a crisis caused by another character's personal trauma. In Die Trying, the lone survivor of the crew assigned to operate the ship holding the seed vault is so devastated by the death of his family that he blocks the away team from entering the vault until they can find a way to reach him emotionally. And in the final 3 episodes of the season, it's Su'Kal whose trauma has manifested itself, not just through the burn, but in various other ways throughout the Hollow simulation that has been his home for most of his life. There's also Detmer's subplot. Like I said earlier, it could have used some more room to breathe, and Detmer herself could stand some more character development in general, but I really appreciated that When Detmer first began displaying symptoms and acting in a way that was unusual, it didn't turn out to be some Star Trek thing that was responsible. It wasn't Control hijacking her cybernetic implant or some alien presence that had taken over her body. It was just that she had gone through a traumatic experience, piloting the ship as it flew through a time vortex and crashed onto an ice planet, and she needed time to work through some shit, just the same as any one of us might need to do were we in a similar situation. I also appreciate that the season's ultimate message about the importance of connection and unification was more nuanced than just we should stop dividing ourselves from each other. As the events in Washington, D.C. last week demonstrated, there are some people we're better off divided from. Admiral Vance found this out during his negotiations with Osira. He let her have her say, listened as she made her case for uniting the Federation and the Emerald Chain, but in the end, he realized that it would do far more harm than good to align with a group of people who are obviously hostile, committed to opposing values, and mostly interested in elevated and empowering themselves, not in doing anything that would increase the common good. After 4 years of the Trump presidency, it was a safe bet by the producers of Discovery that that particular message would resonate. They just couldn't have known how profoundly suited for this particular moment it would be. One last thing that I think worked very well this season was the recurring idea of separation and reunion. Michael and the rest of the Discovery crew begin the season apart, then come back together. The Raiders attacking Earth turn out to be humans who were separated from their home planet, who are then reunited with it. Adira is separated from Gray, then reunited with him, and with the memories of the other hosts of the Tal symbiont. Discovery is separated from the rest of Starfleet, then reunited with it. Saru helps Su'Kal reunite with his Kelpian culture and heritage, which he's been separated from due to being trapped on the crashed ship. And the crew of Discovery are separated. Saru, Culber, and Adira on the planet with Su'Kal, Burnham and Book, and the rest of the crew, led by Tilly, only to reunite in the end. Separation and reunion is a reliable way to create drama and evoke emotion from an audience, and Discovery uses it over and over and over again this season to great effect. And of course, it reinforces the central theme of the season about the importance of reconnection. Discovery continues to be the best-looking, best-directed Star Trek show ever made. The special effects, the camera work, the set design remain absolutely top-notch. There are a couple of new locations this year that I loved, particularly the Seed Vault in Dai-Trying and the shrouded shipyard/space station that serves as Starfleet and Federation headquarters. The updated design of the magic symbiont cave on the Trill homeworld, which is a location we last saw in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, was also cool. The concept of programmable matter, Book's shape-shifting ship, personal transporters, and comm badges with integrated holographic tricorders are all examples of cool new technologies that are introduced that work as logical extensions of things already present in past versions of Star Trek and help to sell this new setting as an even more advanced future than the ones we've previously seen. And perhaps most importantly of all, I cared about what was happening. Despite the many flaws and bumps in the road I talked about earlier, despite the fact that it is definitely not a perfect show or even a nearly perfect show, when I watched Discovery this season, I was invested in the characters. It mattered to me what happened to them. I cared about them. I believed that they cared about each other, and I was interested in what was going to happen next. Any show that leaves me at the end of a season wanting more, eager for the following season to begin, is a good show. And once again, Discovery has pulled off that trick. I don't think I enjoyed this third season quite as much as I did the second season, even though this season's pacing and plotting issues aren't quite as pronounced, but I did enjoy it. And as I said earlier, by the end of the season finale, it absolutely had me. This season, Discovery set out to tell a story about a group of explorers and scientists trying to bring hope to the hopeless, to comfort the fearful, to protect the vulnerable, to find purpose in a strange new world, and ultimately to find each other. It didn't always tell that story as well as it could have. Its ambition exceeded its abilities on occasion, but more often than not, it was smart, heartfelt, relevant, and stubbornly optimistic. In other words, it was pretty good Star Trek.